Good evening, everyone. Today we are going to see about web browser and web server communication using HTTP protocol. Myself, S. Chakravarti, Assistant Professor, Department of Information Technology, Ramco Institute of Technology, Rajapanai. And today's agenda is web browser and web server definition, communication between the web browser and web server, and HTTP protocol, uniform resource locator, and domain names. Web browser. See, a web browser is a software application that allows users to access, retrieve, and display content on the World Wide Web. And the content may be web pages, images, video, and other interactive elements like animations. And it acts as a client that communicates with the web server using HTTP protocol to fetch and display the content. And commonly used web browsers are Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Mozilla Firefox, Safari, etc. And web server. So a web server is a computer system or software that stores, processes, and delivers web pages to users over the internet. That is, web browser sends the HTTP response request message, and the server in turn receives the HTTP request message from the client and check whether the resource is available in the server and sends back to the browser in the form of HTTP response message. That is, the commonly used web servers are Apache, Microsoft Internet Information Server, NGINX, Safari. The diagram shows the interaction between the web browser and web server. The user enters the URL in the web browser, and the browser prepares or generates the valid HTTP request message and contact the DNS server and obtain the IP address. And after obtaining the IP address from the DNS server, the browser will establish the TCP connection with the server. The server in turn sends a response message if the resource is available and send back to the client. Here the browser will render the actual response message. So this is a communication between the web browser and web server. Again, the steps involved in communication between web browser and web server. The user enters the URL in the web browser. The DNS resolution happens. That is, domain name is resolved into IP address. After getting the IP address, the browser will establish the TCP connection with the server on the port 80 for HTTP and port 443 for HTTPS. The browser sends an HTTP request message to the server. The web server processes the request. That is, it checks for the requested resource, or it may run backend scripts if needed. Steps involved in communication between web browser and web server. That is, the server sends back the HTTP response message along with the status code and resource data. Finally, the browser will render the web page. That is the actual output sent by the web server in the form of HTTP response message. Finally, the connection will be closed. Then let's see about the HTTP protocol structure. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is a request response based protocol for communication between the web browser and web server, and is a stateless protocol because the current request doesn't know what has been done in the previous request. So in order to solve this problem, that is HTTP stateless protocol, so we have some mechanisms like cookies, hidden form fields, session tracking mechanisms to recognize the particular user. Later we will discuss about the session tracking mechanisms. Now, HTTP is a client server application level protocol and typically runs over the TCP/IP connection. This is the diagram for HTTP request message and response message used for communication between the client and the server. This web browser sends the HTTP request message to the web server. In turn, web server replies to the request message by sending the HTTP response message. Structure of HTTP request message. Every HTTP request message consists of start line, request headers, blank line, and optional message body. Let's see about the request line. So every request line or start line, we can say is the start line or request line. In turn, consists of three parts. One is request method, another one is request URI, and HTTP version. Then Request method. HTTP protocol defines a set of request methods. Example, get, post, head options. Each one have a specific functionality. That is, get means which is used by the client to get the resource from the server. Post means used to post some data up to the server. The data may be a sensitive case, sensitive one. That is password related data are sent using the post method. Then put method asks the server to store the data. Delete method asks the server to delete the data. Trace asks the server to return a diagnostic trace of the actions it takes. Then options means ask the server to return the list of request methods that it supports. And request URI. So specifies the path of the resource requested, that is the location of the resource where it resides in the server, which must begin from the root of the document-based directory. URI, Uniform Resource Identifier, is a string used to identify resources on the internet. URI is a combination of URL and URL. So URL stands for the Uniform Resource Locator. For example, http://www.retrjpm.ac.in, which denotes the URL. And URL denotes the specific name of the place or a person. For example, URL:/ISBN 978-81-84-31-1223-2 specifies the address of some book. And HTTP version. The two commonly used version are HTTP 1.0 and HTTP 1.1. Then HTTP request headers, which is in the form of name value pairs, and multiple values can be separated by commas. Here the example is post www.retrjpm.ac.in, connection value is keep alive, accept image/gif, image/jpeg. Then blank line, which is used to separate the header and body. Message body is optional in HTTP request message. Then the commonly used MIME types are, MIME stands for multipurpose internet mail extension, which is a standard that can be used to pass a variety of types of information. That may be a text or image or audio or video or animation. We can use the specific MIME types. Text/HTML for HTML document, image/GIF for representing the GIF format images. Image/JPEG means images saved using the file format JPEG. Then text/plain applications, etc. Then commonly used request header fields, that is host, that is this is the actual web address. Then user agent, that is your browser. Then accept languages, that is accept MIME types, accept languages, etc. Right? The content type, content length. So all are the commonly used request header fields. Then example HTTP request message. Request line consists of three parts, that is request method. Here the request method is get. Instead of get, we can use post, get, delete, post, that is trace, etc. And this is the actual URL, that is authority portion of the URL. Then HTTP version. Then optional request headers. Right? Then the blank line, then message body. This is an example for HTTP request message. Then HTTP response message structure is sent by the server to the client, which consists of status line, response header, and optional message body. Status line consists of the HTTP version, status code, and recent price. For example, the version is HTTP 1.1, 200, and the recent price is OK. This is the HTTP response message status line, the next, which is followed by the response header fields. Before that, we are going to see about the status code classes, right? Usually the status code consists of 3 digits. The first digit represents the which class the status code belongs to. The first number 1, the class is informational. Number 2, success. Number 3, redirection. Number 4, client error. Number 5, server error. So it's suppose if the status code starts with 4 means it represents this is a client error. If the status code starts with 0 means it represents redirection. If the status code starts with 2 means the request is fulfilled. There is success. Then commonly used code classes. The 200 OK, that is request process normally. 301 moved permanently. 307 temporary redirect. 401 unauthorized. 403 forbidden. 404 not found. 500 internal error. Okay. So suppose for example, suppose I am accessing the website that is www.ritrgpm.ac.in. After entering the URL, we can suppose I am able to see the home page of college website means here the status is okay. Like that, suppose if I want to access the um, payment section of the particular application means we have to enter the username and password, right? Suppose if the password is not correct means at that time it shows unauthorized, that is used for authentication purpose. Then 403 forbidden, right? The resource is present on the server but is read protected, right? So like that 404 not found, 500 internal error, server error. These are some of the status codes, and which is followed by some common response header fields. It is date, server, last modified, expires, e-tag, accept range, locations. So these are the response header fields generated by the server, right? When the response message is generated, date and time, which server is generating the response message, right? Then last modified, then expire time. So etc. all are specified in the response header fields. Then example HTTP response message. Here see the status line, which consists of three parts. That is our version and the status code. Okay. Here the status code starts with two. Two means there is success. There is here the reason phrase is okay, right? Let's see the first slide. There is 200. So 200 belongs to okay. The resource request passes normally, right? So 200 okay. Then response header fields. These are the some of the response header fields. Date when it generates the response message. Then server last modified. Then hashtag accept ranges, content length, connections, content type, etc. Then the next one is uniform resource locator, which is the unique address for the resource on the internet, right? In order to access the resource on the internet means the URL is essential to access the resource, right? The common syntax is, general syntax is scheme colon double forward slash authority portion slash path question mark query portion, which means scheme means your protocol, HTTP protocol or FTP or Telnet, etc. Then which is followed by the authority portion, then path, then query portion. Here the scheme is HTTP, then authority portion is www.example.org/5678 colon is followed by the port number, then single forward slash up to question mark is represents the path. After the question mark is the query parameter. So this is the general syntax of the uniform resource locator. And the next one is the domain name. So domain name, which is used to identify the computer within a network, right? So which is the service that translates the domain name into the IP address. So from the diagram, it can be easily understand that suppose the client wants to access the website tutorialspoint.com means, so it will in order to establish the connection with the server, that is the tutorials points, the request, that is we need the IP address, right? So in order to obtain the IP address, the client first contact the DNS server and obtain the IP address. After getting the IP address, the client will send the actual HTTP request message after establishing the connection, right? So then the actual HTTP response message will be sent back to the client. So this is a simple process which is going to translate the domain name into the IP address. So next topic is their working, how it works. DNS is the client server network communication protocol. DNS clients and request sends request to the server, while DNS server sends response to the client. Client request contain a name which is converted into IP address, that is forward DNS. Suppose we are accessing the resource by mentioning the host name, that is www.ritrgpm.ac.in means. So in that time, it contact the DNS server and will obtain the IP address. So giving the host name and obtaining the IP address. That process is called forward DNS. That is a reverse DNS means we are giving the IP address, the DNS server will return the host name. That is the reverse DNS. If a client like browser sends the request containing the host name, then a piece of software such as DNS resolver sends the request to the DNS server and obtain the IP address of the host name. So if DNS server does not contain the IP address associated with the host name, then forwards the request to another DNS server. If IP address has arrived at the server, which in turn completes the request over the IP protocol, TCP/IP protocol. This is the overall working principle of the DNS. So these are some of the commonly used domain names. There is .com, the commercial organization, .gov, government organization, .edu, educational institution, .int, international organization, .net means network groups, .org, non-profit organization, MIL, military groups, .in, subdomains of the country like India, then UK, then JP. These are the commonly used domain names. Then is domain names are organized in hierarchical form. That is the generic domain, country domain, and universe domain. Generic domain, let's see with the example, that is generic domain. We can access in the hierarchical manner, right? chal.atc.fhdi.edu, right? So defines the registered host according to the generic behavior. Each node in a tree defines the domain name, which is an index to the DNS database. It uses 3 character labels, and these labels describe the organization type. Country domain and universe domain. The country domain is similar to the generic domain. It is represented using 2 character abbreviations, right? .in for India. Inverse domain, already said, is that the inverse domain is mapping the address to name. It is the reverse process. When the server has received a request from the client, and the server contains the files of only authorized clients, to determine whether the client is on an authorized list or not, it sends a query to the DNS server and asks for mapping an address to the name. The reference is Java 2. Thank you.